always believed that ideas were like fingerprints, unique, delicate, and belonging only to the person who carried them. Mine was no different. It wasn't just a proposal typed out in bullet points or a PowerPoint deck with flashy slides. It was my brainchild, nurtured by sleepless nights, coffee-stained notebooks, and hours of staring at my apartment ceiling at 3 a.m, wondering if I was foolish to think I could change the company from the inside out. But before I tell you how it was stolen, how I was stolen from, I need to tell you about the place where all of this began. I worked at Blackwell & Hunt, a mid-sized consulting firm in the heart of the city. Not a flashy skyscraper with glass walls like the giants, but tall enough to make you feel important when you rode the elevator up to the 20th floor. The kind of place where everyone wore pressed suits, where small talk was currency, and where even the break room coffee machine had a plaque about efficiency and excellence. I was 29, 3 years into my role as a junior strategist, climbing the ladder faster than most but not nearly as fast as I wanted. I'd always been ambitious, not in the sense of stepping on others, but in proving myself, in carving my name into something bigger than just employee number 472. And then there was him. Daniel Graves, my boss. Director of strategy. Charismatic, sharp, the kind of man who could sell sand in a desert. Everyone admired him, or at least pretended to. He was known for visionary ideas, but the whispers in the halls suggested those visions weren't always his. Still, he had the presence, the reputation, and the ego to match. He liked to say, "In this business, perception is reality." I should have known then. The idea that started it all came to me after a long week of working on a dull client case that felt more like painting over rust than fixing the problem. Blackwell & Hunt thrived on recycling old strategies, tweaking them just enough to look new, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the future was elsewhere. I remember the night clearly. My laptop was open on my kitchen table, half-empty Chinese takeout next to it, and the city lights flickering through my window. The idea hit me like a jolt. A new framework for client strategy integration. Innovative but practical, a hybrid system that combined digital transformation with behavioral economics. Could reduce client churn by 40%, maybe more. I stayed up until dawn, sketching flowcharts, researching models, building something that felt alive. By Monday, I had turned it into a polished proposal. Called it Project Phoenix. The name wasn't accidental. Phoenixes rise from ashes, reborn stronger. I wanted our clients to feel that no matter how broken their systems seemed, there was a way to rise again. I spent days refining every slide, every graph. It wasn't just about the numbers. It was about telling a story. When I finally printed it out and slipped it into a binder, my hands were trembling. This was it. This was my moment. When I brought it to Daniel, he smiled, that practiced smile of his, the one that revealed nothing and everything all at once. Well, he said, flipping through the pages. You've been busy. I think this could change how we approach client retention, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. It's scalable, adaptable, and we could be first to market with this model. No one else is doing it like this. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. Interesting. Very interesting. Leave it with me, I'll take a closer look. I left his office buzzing with excitement. Finally, I thought. Finally, he'll see what I can do. For the next week, Daniel avoided me. I'd pass him in the hallway, and he'd give me a nod but nothing more. I told myself he was busy, that he needed time to review it. But then came the quarterly strategy meeting. The entire department gathered in the glass-walled conference room, the skyline of the city glowing behind us. Daniel stood at the head of the table, sleek slides glowing on the screen. I had my notebook ready, eager to hear updates, when the title slide appeared. Project Phoenix. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, the bold letters I had typed in a haze of caffeine and adrenaline. The slides looked familiar. My graphs, my flowcharts, my structure. Even the tagline I had agonized over for hours. And then he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice smooth, confident, rehearsed. "I've been developing something I believe could redefine our client approach. A framework I've been working on for months. Month. I felt heat rush to my face. I gripped my pen so hard it nearly snapped. My colleagues leaned forward, impressed, scribbling notes as he presented my idea with the polish of a showman. Every word that left his mouth felt like a knife twisting deeper. Not once did he mention my name. Not once did he glance at me. By the end of the presentation, the room erupted in applause. Our managing partner, Eleanor Hunt herself, stood and said, "Brilliant, Daniel. This could really put us ahead of the curve." I sat there in silence, my notebook empty, my throat tight. When the meeting ended, people crowded around Daniel, congratulating him, showering him with praise. I slipped out quietly, my legs trembling beneath me. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and pressed my fists against my mouth to keep from screaming. He had stolen it. Clean, simple, and devastatingly effective. For the rest of the day, I walked through the office in a daze. Every congratulatory email that landed in my inbox for our department's innovative direction felt like a slap. Daniel acted like nothing had happened. At one point, he even winked at me, as if daring me to say something. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. I stared at my laptop, at the original files with my name on them, time-stamped, proof of my ownership. I thought about confronting him, about going to HR, about screaming the truth from the rooftop of the building. But then I remembered his words. In this business, perception is reality. Daniel had the perception. He had the reputation. Who would they believe? The junior strategist or the golden director? I sat in the dark, glass in hand, and realized something. This wasn't the end. He might have stolen my idea, but he hadn't stolen my mind. And I was going to make him regret underestimating me. The morning after Daniel's presentation, I woke up with a pounding headache, the kind that feels like punishment for emotions you can't control. My apartment looked the way I felt, disheveled, stale, and exhausted. The empty wine glass on my nightstand caught the sunlight and mocked me, as if it knew I had drunk my courage away instead of acting on it. I stood in front of the mirror, pressing a cold washcloth to my face. My reflection looked foreign to me. Puffy eyes, lips set in a hard line, shoulders slumped like someone who had already been defeated. But I wasn't defeated. Not yet. The subway ride to work was unusually suffocating that day. Every bump of the train, every chatter of the passengers grated against my nerves. In my mind, I replayed Daniel's smug smile, his rehearsed delivery, the way people had clapped as though he were a savior. I clenched my fists until my nails left half-moons in my palms. When I walked into the office, the air buzzed with talk about Daniel's brilliant idea. Two associates in the break room were practically glowing as they discussed how revolutionary Project Phoenix would be. One of them said, "I mean, this could seriously change our client portfolio." I wanted to scream, "It's mine. Every single slide, every word, every sleepless night. It's mine." But I bit my tongue. When I reached my desk, there was an email from Daniel himself waiting in my inbox. The subject line, "Follow up on Phoenix." My heart raced as I clicked it open. "Great to see you in the meeting yesterday. Let's catch up this afternoon about where we can best position you on the Phoenix rollout." Daniel. I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. Best position me. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He wanted me on the team, not as the creator, not as the visionary, but as the grunt who executed the work while he wore the crown. I closed the email without responding. The hours crawled by. My co-workers were all smiles, congratulating each other as though they'd been part of it. Daniel walked around with the air of a celebrity, stopping by desks, asking for input, already playing the role of visionary leader. When he stopped by mine, I kept my eyes glued to my screen. "Morning," he said casually, as though nothing had happened. "I sent you a note. Did you see it?" "Yes," I replied curtly. "Good," he said. "We'll talk more this afternoon. I think you could be very useful in building out the next phase." Useful. That word dug into me like a splinter. Not valued. Not recognized. Just useful. I nodded, forcing my expression into something neutral. "Of course." He smiled, that insincere, calculated smile, and walked away. The rest of the day was a blur of bitterness. By the time our meeting rolled around, I was raw with anger, but I knew better than to show it. I sat across from him in his glass-walled office, hands folded tightly in my lap. "So," he began, leaning back in his chair, "Phoenix is going to be big. Eleanor's already asked me to start pitching it to some of our major clients. This is going to elevate our department's profile." Our department, his reputation, my work. "I'll need a team working full-time on building out the detailed playbooks and models," he continued. "That's where you come in. You'll be point on the data models. You're good with numbers." I wanted to laugh. Good with numbers. He had just stolen my brainchild and was offering me the scraps. "What about authorship?" I asked quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "Authorship?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was my proposal, my research, my framework. Shouldn't my name be on it?" His smile disappeared, replaced by a hard, cold look I hadn't seen before. "Listen," he said slowly, his tone dropping an octave. "I know you've put in some work, and I appreciate that. But big ideas don't belong to individuals here. They belong to the company. To the team." "The team," I repeated. "Yes, and right now that means me. Eleanor trusts me to deliver. You'll have opportunities, don't worry. But if you want to move up in this business, you need to understand how it works. Credit is collective. What matters is execution, not ego." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it tasted like blood. Execution, not ego. He had just erased me with a sentence, and he wanted me to thank him for the privilege. "Do you understand?" he asked, his voice firm. He nodded. "Yes, Daniel." "Good." He leaned back again, satisfied. "Now, why don't you start drafting some of the data pipelines? I'll handle the client-facing materials." I stood up before I said something I couldn't take back. "Sure." When I left his office, my hands were shaking. That night I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop across the street from the office, my laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor on a blank page. I could barely taste the bitter espresso I kept sipping, trying to drown out the rage with caffeine. I thought about quitting, walking away, leaving Daniel to choke on his own arrogance. But then I thought about Project Phoenix, about the sleepless nights I had poured into it. If I left, he would win. He'd build his empire on my ashes, and I'd be nothing more than a footnote in his story. Well, if he wanted a war, I would give him one. But not recklessly, not loudly. That would be playing his game. I needed to be smarter. I started by making backups, copies of every file, every draft, every timestamp. I uploaded them to cloud storage, encrypted drives, even emailed them to a personal account I rarely used. If Daniel thought he had erased my fingerprints from Phoenix, he was wrong. Over the next week, I watched him closely. He strutted through the office like a king, already planning client presentations. People were drawn to him, intoxicated by his confidence. But I noticed things others didn't: the way he skimmed over technical details, the way he avoided answering deep questions. He didn't understand Phoenix the way I did. He couldn't. And that was my first advantage. Meanwhile, I played the role of dutiful subordinate. I sat in meetings, took notes, drafted models, nodded at his directions. But inside I was cataloging every weakness, every blind spot. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. HR would side with him, Eleanor would side with him, the company would side with him. But if I could prove that he was a fraud, if I could expose him from the inside. The thought thrilled me. Late one night, when most of the office had gone home, I stayed behind, working on Phoenix materials. The building was quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound. My reflection in the darkened windows looked like a stranger, eyes sharp, determined, almost dangerous. That was when I realized I wasn't the same woman who had walked into Daniel's office with trembling hands and hopeful eyes. That version of me had died in that meeting room when he stole my idea. What remained was someone else. someone who wanted revenge. The conference hall smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Rows of polished chairs stretched out like a sea, filled with executives, clients, and reporters tapping on tablets. The screens at the front glowed with the title slide, Project Phoenix. I stood backstage, palms pressed against my skirt to keep them steady. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Every sleepless night, every carefully saved file, every false smile I'd forced for months had led here. Daniel thought this was his coronation. He had no idea he was walking into his downfall. The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. Please welcome, from Harrison and Price Consulting, Senior Director Daniel Whitaker. He strutted on stage like a man born for it, suit gleaming under the lights, grin wide and self-assured. The applause swelled. He spread his arms like a preacher greeting his flock. Good morning, he began, voice dripping with confidence. Today, I am proud to share with you an idea that will reshape the future of client analytics. We call it Project Phoenix. I almost laughed at the we. His entire speech was written around the fiction that Phoenix had sprung fully formed from his mind. He had polished the anecdotes, rehearsed the pauses, and the crowd, eager, gullible, leaned in. For 20 minutes, he dazzled them. The slides Marissa had designed glowed behind him. The models Raj had fine-tuned glittered with authority. Every sentence he spoke was stolen, but the audience didn't know. They clapped, they nodded, they whispered to each other with excitement. Waited. Then the moderator invited questions. My pulse surged. A man from the front row stood. His badge read Chief Data Officer, Wexler Corporation. Fascinating work, he said. But could you explain the anomaly detection component? Specifically, how the algorithm scales with exponentially growing datasets. Daniel's confident smile wavered for the briefest second. My breath caught. There it is. He cleared his throat. Well, the beauty of Phoenix is that it's flexible. It adapts to any dataset seamlessly. The man frowned. Yes, but what's the underlying mechanism? Is it clustering? Neural nets? Proprietary logic? Daniel's eyes flicked toward the slide, then back to the man. It's a hybrid, he stammered. A combination of clustering and adaptive regression models. Well, I felt a thrill course through me. He'd just dug his own grave. The man pressed. But your visualization suggests nonlinear anomaly tracking. Regression wouldn't capture that effectively. Could you walk us through the actual math? Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward me at the side of the stage, just for a second, as though silently begging for rescue. I didn't move. He floundered. The math is complex, of course, but the important thing is that the client experience. No, the man interrupted. His tone had sharpened. The important thing is that we understand whether your model is scalable. If you can't explain the math, then how can we trust the product? The room's energy shifted. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Daniel's smile cracked. Sweat beaded at his temple. And that was my cue. I stepped forward smoothly, as though it were planned. If I may, I said, projecting my voice across the room. Heads turned. Daniel stiffened, but I ignored him. The anomaly detection model, I continued, uses clustering as a preliminary filter, but the real engine is a neural net-based structure we custom-trained on client-specific data. That's how we scale across exponential growth curves. It's explained in detail in the technical appendix. The man from Wexler lit up with interest. Now that makes sense. Thank you. Applause. Genuine appreciative applause, not for Daniel but for me. The moderator smiled. It seems we have an expert in the room. Daniel forced a laugh. Yes, well, of course. My colleague has worked closely on some of the technical aspects. But it was too late. The illusion had cracked. More questions followed, increasingly specific. And every time Daniel faltered, I stepped in. Calm, precise, fluent in the work I had lived and breathed for months. The crowd shifted their gaze from him to me, their trust sliding like sand through his fingers. By the end of the session, It was clear who the real architect of Phoenix was. Backstage, Daniel cornered me. His face was flushed, his voice a low hiss. What the hell was that? I met his eyes without flinching. It was me saving your ass. You undermined me, he snapped. In front of everyone. No, I said coolly. I told the truth. If you can't explain the work, maybe you shouldn't be taking credit for it. His eyes narrowed. Careful, Evelyn. You don't know how this game is played. Oh, I said softly, leaning closer. I know exactly how it's played. And I'm done letting you win it. I walked away before he could answer. My hands were trembling, but not with fear. With exhilaration. The fallout began almost immediately. That evening, industry blogs buzzed with coverage of the summit. Several articles noted Daniel's shaky responses, and my precise, confident interventions. One headline even read, Phoenix Project, Rising Star Emerges from the Shadows. By Monday, whispers were circulating inside the firm. Eleanor summoned me to her office. She was calm, inscrutable, tapping her pen against a folder as I sat across from her. I've been reviewing the reports from the summit, she said. It seems your role in Phoenix has been underplayed. I kept my expression neutral. My contributions have always been collaborative. Her sharp eyes studied me. Don't play coy. I'm not blind. Daniel floundered. You didn't. Tell me, Evelyn, how much of Phoenix is really yours? The silence stretched. Then, quietly, I slid the USB drive from my purse and placed it on her desk. Everything, I said. And I can prove it. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she picked up the drive, turning it in her fingers like a jewel. Finally she smiled, small, cold, satisfied. Thank you, she said. Daniel's fall was swift. Within a week, Eleanor had stripped him of Phoenix, reassigning leadership to me. Within a month, rumors swirled of an internal investigation into his conduct. By the end of the quarter he was gone. Officially, he had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, he had been forced out, disgraced and discredited. I should have felt triumphant. And in some ways I did. Watching him pack up his office, avoiding everyone's eyes, was a satisfaction I had craved for months. But the truth was more complicated. Because I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman who had once wanted nothing more than recognition, who had begged for a sliver of credit, was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper. Someone who understood that the corporate world wasn't about talent or hard work. It was about power. And power had to be taken. Phoenix became a success under my name. Clients lined up, the firm's profits soared, and my title climbed. People whispered my name with respect, sometimes with awe. But at night, when I looked in the mirror, I sometimes wondered what I had lost along the way. I had wanted revenge, and I had gotten it. Daniel was destroyed. His empire was ashes. And yet, in the hollow silence of my apartment, I sometimes asked myself, had I killed him, or had I killed the last remnants of myself? The reflection that stared back at me never answered. Only smiled. The days that followed were a masterclass in self-control. I had to smile when I wanted to scream, nod when I wanted to throw my coffee in Daniel's face. Every time he paraded my work as his own, I had to force myself to look interested, even proud, as though I were one of the worshippers in his little cult. Inside, though, I was sharpening my knives. The first step in any revenge, I realized, was patience. Daniel was clever, yes, but he was also arrogant. Men like him always believed they were untouchable. They strutted around with blind confidence, too enamored with their own reflection to see the cracks forming beneath their feet. All I had to do was widen those cracks. I began by documenting everything. Every email, every chat message, every revision in the project files. I became meticulous, keeping duplicate records, even screenshots. At first it felt paranoid, like I was hoarding evidence in case the universe ever demanded a trial. But the more I gathered, the more powerful I felt. Late one night, I pulled up the metadata on one of Daniel's so-called original Phoenix decks. My heart quickened when I saw it. The author tag was mine. My name embedded in the file properties, weeks before his version ever appeared. He hadn't even bothered to scrub it. I took screenshots, saved copies, archived them in multiple places. Each artifact was a weapon I tucked into my arsenal. But I knew raw evidence wasn't enough. To bring Daniel down, I needed more than proof. I needed strategy. That was when I started paying closer attention to Eleanor. She was our department head. Sharp, ambitious, and notoriously hard to impress. She liked results, not excuses. Daniel had her ear, but I suspected her loyalty was shallow. If Phoenix stumbled even once, she'd turn on him without hesitation. I just had to make sure she saw the stumble at the right time. Meanwhile, I started forming quiet alliances. Not openly, that would tip Daniel off, but subtly through late-night chats and casual favors. There was Raj, the senior analyst who had been overlooked for promotions too many times. He had a keen eye for detail and a simmering resentment for management. Then there was Marissa, the designer who had built slide decks for every major presentation but never got credit. Both of them were sharp, undervalued, and hungry for recognition. I didn't tell them everything. Not yet. But I let little truths slip, just enough to plant seeds. Funny how Daniel always seems to come up with ideas right after we submit our drafts, I said to Marissa one evening as we worked late. Her laugh was bitter. Tell me about it. Last quarter's pitch. Half those visuals were mine. He didn't even thank me. I smiled sympathetically. Yeah. He has a pattern. Raj was easier. He already distrusted Daniel. That guy couldn't build a model if his life depended on it, he muttered during one meeting, after Daniel had hand-waved through a complex question. I raised an eyebrow. You noticed that too? Of course, Raj said. He's all talk. One day, someone's going to catch him bluffing. Maybe sooner than you think, I murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. Piece by piece, I was building my quiet army. Daniel, meanwhile, basked in the spotlight. Eleanor sent him to pitch Phoenix to a potential client, a major corporation that could bring millions in revenue. He came back triumphant, grinning like he had just conquered a kingdom. The client loved it, he announced at the team meeting. They're eager for a full proposal. We'll need all hands on deck to build out the details. Applause broke out around the room. I clapped too, though my palms itched with the effort. Behind the scenes, though, I noticed cracks forming. His pitch had been flashy, yes, but shallow. The client's questions had revealed holes in his understanding. If Raj and I hadn't scrambled to provide technical clarifications, the whole thing might have collapsed. And that gave me an idea. What if I stopped covering for him? The thought electrified me. Daniel had built his empire on the assumption that people like me would always patch the leaks, always clean up behind him. If I stepped back, if I let him stand exposed, his brilliance would crumble like papier-mâché in the rain. But I couldn't just pull away suddenly. That would make him suspicious. I needed the timing to be perfect. So I waited, played the role. I worked late, delivered polished models, handed him neat packages of insights he could parade around. And all the while I studied him. His weaknesses, his overconfidence, his inability to think 3 steps ahead. I also studied myself, the woman I was becoming. Sometimes, late at night when I sat alone with my laptop, I would catch my reflection in the black screen. My eyes were different now. Sharper, harder. There was no trace of the naive employee who had once begged for recognition. What stared back at me was someone else entirely. Someone who wasn't afraid anymore. One Friday evening, Daniel called for an impromptu team meeting. We gathered in the conference room, exhausted and bleary-eyed from the week. He strode in, energized as ever, announcing, "We've been invited to present Phoenix at the regional summit next month." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The summit was huge. Dozens of clients, industry leaders, press coverage. If Phoenix made an impression there, Daniel's star would skyrocket. But if it failed, "This is our chance to shine," he declared. "I'll lead the keynote, of course, But I'll need support from all of you. Data, visuals, logistics. Everything has to be perfect. I felt my lips curl into the faintest smile. Perfect. This was the moment I'd been waiting for.